The market wakes like a kettle that forgot whether it was a promise or a threat. So you set the horn lamp on the stew seller's bench until a warm coin of light lands where onions, water, and memory all pretend to be the same price. The lane is a braid of smells. Pepper that thinks it is courage, garlic that thinks it is cleanliness, meat that hopes to be forgiven by heat. But the well sits 20 paces uphill from a latrine trench that remembers every confession market crowds have tried to bury. Two vats breathe, one rolling like a hymn, one dozing like an alibi. Pails lean against a plank the color of neglect. Flies make tiny parables over lids that haven't learned the difference between cover and costume. You lay your palm on the bench as if oak could borrow your pulse. Then you hang counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise themselves before mouths higher appetite. Water drawn above lip, boil hard, simmer kept. No topping yesterday, ladles boiled, cups not shared, hands washed, buckets covered, trench downhill, thanks collected. The beetle's daughter taps the rim with the beetle. Wood hums. The stew sulks into honesty. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp honest, not the kind that sells songs about bravery boiled to warm. Then in the comments give me your 7-word market rule you'd actually nail beside a vat. Boil hard, simmer kept, cups not shared, hands washed. I'll pin the strongest and carry them to the next square, where water still mistakes itself for a blessing. Typhoid is not a myth. It is the summer habit of a town that lets cold stew warm itself into gossip. Nobody here says salmonella. They say the long fever, the one that begins with headache and ends with family. The one that thrives on days when steam pretends to be sufficient and lids admit too much conversation. Wells close to latrines trade secrets. Buckets carried without lids grow memories. Wooden ladles dip through 3 hours of serving, and no one bruises a finger on the ladle to ask whether it remembers yesterday. You hang a second card over the rope at the well. Bucket covered, rope clean, no dipping cups, water drawn above lip. A boy reaches to drink directly from the windlass bucket. The card bumps his knuckles. The herb wife hands him a cup that will be boiled in a quarter glass. Prevention is always a slower sentence than hunger. You make it legible. Custom tries to drape itself over onions. Stew sellers add yesterday's leftovers to today's meat for body, then sweeten with dried fruit and blessings. No topping yesterday lands on 3 lids with 2 nails each. A seller opens his mouth to complain and then imagines his own child drinking his mistake. He pins your card higher and invents the idea you wanted him to. A thanks jar for the bowl that would have been kept too long. Stew thrown out on the hour becomes stew paid for by the town, boiled for the poor in the infirmary yard. Gratitude buys more theology than thrift. Heat must behave like a public office. You bring a sand glass and hang a slate called boil schedule where ladles bump it. At the top, boil hard at sunup, 10 minutes rolling. Simmer kept. No nap longer than churches allow. Boil hard every half glass, 5 minutes. Discard at vespers, no arguments. The bellows man from the forge grins into this new liturgy and volunteers to keep time. His rhythm rescues more bellies than he will ever see. A poet writes a verse about clocks. You make him write the schedule under it because art improves when it carries water. Ladles lie. You make them confess. A bucket of rolling water sits by the vat with its own card. Ladles boiled each quarter glass. Beside it, a little bowl of vinegar labeled "Rinse between hands." The Guild of Spoon Carvers pins no cracked rims to its plank like repentance. A child reaches for the ladle while the seller's back is turned. The card taps his wrist. He learns to ask, then to watch, then to carry water. That is how you make future beetles that prefer pointing to shouting. Cups breed fever faster than rhymes. The alehouse's beam once taught you no credit for throwing. Today, the stew rail learns cups not shared. The potter's stall begins selling cheap mugs stamped with a fly under a line, a joke that pays for itself because the joke is true. The Sisters of Steam, the bathkeepers who learn to run public hygiene as a business, post a second slate: hand wash bench here, water boiled, vinegar ladled. People laugh the way people laugh when something is obviously correct and embarrassingly new. They use it. Less jostling, fewer stories. The market learns to make lines for respect. Stew and wells do not quarrel alone. Latrines argue in alleys. Trench downhill. Cover daily lands on the oaken door by the lane where sellers empty their slops. The Reeves man wants to measure obedience, not preach it. He walks the line with ash and a spade. He writes thanks when he sees lids and charge when he sees flies. He enjoys being furniture. He did not know he would. The first fever finds the boy who drank from the bucket, and one of the spoon carver's apprentices who washed hands only when the ration bell sounded. The surgeon opens the infirmary door with the bowl already hot. The herb wife keeps vinegar and blankets and slogans you did not write but approve. Cool first, water allowed, cups not shared in wards. The beadle's daughter posts no anonymous posting on the infirmary rail because grief loves the false speed of rumor. The boy's mother brings the ladle she forgot to boil and scrubs. The spoon carver's shop hangs hands washed over its bench with 2 nails and a new humility. Shame is weather. The only useful kind is the one that waters seeds. Wells are theaters when lids are lazy. You call the jailkeeper, whose hand learned chalk last winter, and make him point at the well as if it were a wicket. He writes time drawn and cover replaced on a slate that stays with the rope, because time heals only what time interrupts. No dipping cups changes the shape of thirst. An elder frowns, his grandson laughs. Both learn to prefer ladles that have been boiled to hands that have not. A stew guild forms itself by accident. 4 sellers agree to keep the schedule, to post boil hard where their own wrists will bruise it, to buy lids together, to measure cups, to throw out vats on the hour and pay for it with a jar labeled thanks. The Reeve posts rates posted beside the stew board so hunger does not have to guess. The beetle posts slander fined in case a rival calls safety laziness. When accusations appear on wet paper, the poets who used to aim adjectives now mop. Hygiene has found its chorus. The hospital chapel adopts your verbs with relief. Clean linen lives above the basin. Water allowed hangs on the dipper. No ordeal talk sits where envy would prefer to rehearse. Thanks collected occupies a peg that used to carry confession notices. The prior learns to love a sentence that contains no angels and fewer funerals. He carries lids to the pitch yard like a man proud of how non-miraculous he has become. The beadle invents the only entertainment you will tolerate near a pot. Silence. Quarter glass horn taps once. Every cellar boils hard. 5 minutes. Ladles go into rolling water. Hands go into the washing bench. Flies go out. Gossip waits. Children get to pull the sand. Poets must count with them. Nobles must wait. Equal boredom. Equal breath. The sound of that quarter glass becomes the market's new hymn. Because typhoid hides inside buckets more quietly than lances hide in songs, you make a map. The stew book lists where drawn, when boiled, who watched, thanks. The well roll lists when covered, who signed. The latrine slate lists trench downhill, covered, ash added. A man tries to be offended, then notices he likes pointing. A woman who used to apologize for caring says, "Sign it," twice, and wonders why she did not start this job when she was 13. Summer invites both heat and laziness to become friends. You move the stew vats 2 cart lengths from the latrine trench and mail no vats uphill of pits at ankle height, where overconfident ankles will bruise it. The barkers for roasted meat grumble. The Bat Sisters offer charcoal and a fresh slop lane. The market manages itself. You did not invent virtue. You invented lanes. Typhoid looks for a space between hours. The steward negotiates a small, cheap miracle with the Sisters of Steam. Pour pot of vat at the infirmary, boiled to him daily, fed by thanks, fed to mouths that cannot pay, emptied clean, never topped, never dozing. Widows with children carry bowls home without theology required. That is the opposite of custom. It becomes the schedule of a town that refuses to rent fever a stall. The rhyme sellers finally serve you. They write a verse that the crowd refuses to forget. Boil hard, keep simmer, no topping yesterday. Cups not shared, ladles boiled, hands washed, trench downhill, lids close, thanks paid. You do not tell them it is prose that rhymes. You make them paint the words on planks anyway. Literacy leans on music and does not always fall. Mid-rail, it is your turn. Drop into the comments the 7 words you would nail beside any vat. Boil hard, simmer kept, cups not shared, hands washed. Subscribe and tap the bell so part 2 finds you before the first hot week convinces a lid to become a story. When market closes, you walk the loop that keeps houses instead of histories. At the well, cover replaced, rope clean. At the trench, ash added, pit filled downhill. At the bench, hands washed, cups boiled. At the vats, lids closed, books signed. At the infirmary, bowl hot, water cool, thanks counted. The lamp's coin of light makes your cards look ordinary. That is the edge you wanted water to grow. Alice ties her apron, lifts a lid with a cloth, and laughs at herself for thinking discipline was a kind of sadness. It is not. It is simply the price you pay to eat in a century that wants to remind you what warm stew can hide when the well is too friendly with the trench. She pinches a coin into the thanks jar and tells her daughter the sentence you have been making towns rehearse all year. Read the board before you lift anything. The child bumps her palm against "boil hard" and then carries a bucket with a lid like a person who intends to outlive songs. Give me your click and your rule and your time. I will bring the horn, the slate, the vinegar, the nails, the scroll, and the habit that has saved more breath here than any miracle. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths rent bodies. Say continue, and we will call the well inspector, the trench maker, the bath keeper, the butcher, the alehouse, the beadle, and the sheriff to keep the long fever hungry for a very long time. The well inspector arrives with a ledger bound in hide and a length of clean rope looped over his shoulder. So you set the horn lamp on the curb until a warm coin of light lands where thirst and memory decide whether they are allies. The stone ring is dark with grip marks. The windlass creaks like an old rule that wants to be rewritten. A smaller boy leans for curiosity until your card taps his wrist. You hang counsel at mouth height, where hands must bruise before mouths baptize themselves. Bucket covered, rope clean, water drawn above lip, no dipping cups, time drawn chalked, cover replaced, trench downhill, thanks collected. He touches every line with 2 fingers as if the letters were a latch. That is the point. We are here to turn grammar into wood and wood into habit. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp paid for, not the one that sells poetry boiled until thin. And in the comments, give me your 7-word well rule you would actually nail beside a rope. Bucket covered, rope clean, no dipping cups, thanks. I'll pen the strongest and carry them to the next parish where water still mistakes proximity for purity. The inspector sets his rope on the curb like a sacrament and begins to work with your cadence. He unwinds the market's rope and examines the part that rubs the windlass, the part that kisses buckets, the part that sits in puddles when boys are lazy. Rope clean does not mean washed once. It means scrubbed with ash on the hour, rinsed in boiled water, dried in the sun like theology that can bear daylight. He chalks time drawn on the slate at the post, sun up, first quarter glass, second, third, fourth. He writes his own name under it, because names save more lives than saints when the rope forgets itself. He does not bless the stone. He blesses repetition. On the far side of the square, the trench maker slaps his shovel into clay like a judge that got tired of declarations. He posts his card at mouth height, where feet must brush it before they make work for buckets. Trench downhill, cover daily, ash added, pigs kept out, offal to slaughter yard only. He moves the market slop lane 2 cart lengths farther from the well lip and sets 2 lids on the trench with hinges that creak the way grammar should. A boy tries to lean them open and discovers they are heavier than a rumor. The beadle's daughter hums the quarter glass under her breath while she writes the trench schedule. Rake, lid, ash, rents. Rake, lid, ash, rents. Lids are the mops of the earth. The Sisters of Steam rehang their slate where the sun can find it, and add 2 lines with the confidence of people who enjoy being practical. Hands washed before cups fetched, and ladles boiled every quarter glass. They pen a cloth on a crossbar and call it the washing bench. Vinegar sits in a bowl the color of discipline. A pitcher of boiled water steams like a mild argument no one resents. A man reaches for a cup after tying a mule. The card taps his knuckles. He laughs, rinses, and discovers he likes the feel of clean better than he expected. He says thanks in coin. The infirmary will boil his gratitude into soup. The butcher is a climate. Knives, hooks, scald pot, drain. He tacks your card on his stall, where wrists must bruise before pride hires flies. Scald kept rolling, offal carted, drain clear, fly covers down, no swill to stew, blood to trench lid shut. He boils the scald until it makes its own weather. He sets a screen over meat that used to inhale mosquitoes. He measures the distance between his stall and the well with steps that become doctrine. He sells bones to a poor pot that lives in the infirmary yard rather than to the pot that lives on top of yesterday at the corner. No swill to stew tastes offensive only to people who never liked living. The alehouse discovers that thirst prefers clarity to bravado. The keeper posts cups not shared and no dipping cups at well on the beam beside no credit for throwing. He adds a line you did not write but approve of in public. Stew cup, not beer cup. It means no cross-pollination of habits. Drink here, eat there, wash between. He buys 2 ladles and boils them each quarter glass because the children have been counting out loud and it turns out that counting is contagious. He enjoys being counted upon. The beetle learns to sell boredom as entertainment. He calls silence quarter glass, with the beetle at the top of every hour. That's roll for 5 minutes. Ladles go into the boiling bowl. Hands go to the washing bench. Lids sit like content commandments. Flies scatter. When the beetle taps again, noise resumes with better breath. It becomes a game. It becomes a liturgy. It becomes a guarantee that rich and poor inhale equality at least 8 times a day. Reform has little victories. This one is a bell. The sheriff brings a thin roll of market ordinances that used to be whispered like preferences. You move the horn lamp until paper agrees to become furniture. On the post, he nails your plain clauses in his own hand. Boil hard at sunup, 10 minutes rolling. Ladles boiled each quarter glass. No topping yesterday. Rate posted. Thanks jar visible. Trench downhill. Lids close. Bucket covered. Rope clean. No dipping cups. He finds a stew seller 1 groat for ignoring quarter glass. The seller pays and then pins soup before stories above his vat because he finally understands what applause costs in fevers. The sheriff discovers that writing thanks read before charges at the top of his minute makes his day taste better than speeches ever did. Fly wrights appear like a guild you never asked for. Boys who mended sieve bottoms now stitch screens for butchers and fishwives. They paint flies on their stall sign like saints nobody will pray to. Then sell their screens at cost plus a cup of stew boiled in the correct hour. You buy 3 purely for the satisfaction of rewarding a trade that decided to be boring in the town's favor. The first long fever tries to live inside a story and finds only a schedule. A girl who washed hands after the basin but before touching the ladle becomes mildly ill. The surgeon warms the bowl. The herb wife manages blankets. The beadle wraps no anonymous posting on the infirmary rail when a relative arrives with rhyme. The quarter glass continues because markets cannot acquire penance just because one person's stomach discovered unluckiness. The girl drinks water that came above the well lip. She does not share her cup. She lives. Nobody builds a shrine. They boil a pot. Because typhoid hunts the space between shifts, you post an evening slate that insults nostalgia. Discard at Vespers in letters that nudge a hand. Trench lids down. Ash added. Buckets scalded. Rope rinsed and hung. Cover replaced. The Sisters of Steam send 2 girls with vinegar and will. The beadle assigns 2 boys to lids. The well inspector chalks done, with the satisfaction of a man who has enjoyed not losing a night. A minstrel writes a verse called Lids at Sunset that is better than he deserves. 3 houses pin your kitchen cards next to your market cards because domestic is where vigilance avoids applause. Apron tied and cover sparks save more cupboards than sermons. Cool first finds its job again, where kettles try to marry arrogance. A mother smacks a small wrist gently and changes a century. You measure success by chores that steal their own credit. The trench maker adds ash added to his lid slate without being asked, and begins to carry a small shovel the way men used to carry opinions. The potter stamps a fly crossed out on every cheap mug and sells out because jokes travel faster than codes. The butcher prints offal carded in a hand obvious enough to comfort you. The Bath sisters invent thanks ladle, 1 measure from every vat for the poor pot, and nobody presses for miracles. They like their faith edible. Somebody tries to sell blessed drops that make boiling unnecessary for those who trust. The sheriff reads boil schedule into the hush. The beadle finds the rhyme. The Bath sisters hand the hawker a lid and the rule no topping yesterday. The hawker laughs, apologizes, and buys a screen for his own stall since he turned out to be a pie seller in disguise. Commerce, chastened and put to work, is nearly civic. A foreign merchant learns your signs by touch rather than pride. He arrives with a white heat pitch show and leaves with lids. He arrives with cups in a basket like songs and leaves with mugs stamped with crossed flies. He arrives with bucket rope worn where reputation lives and leaves with new hemp and a smile he did not expect. He steals your cards. He pays with lilies. You refuse to be suspicious of portable virtue. Because hands forget faster than mouths, you make a toy that bruises precisely. 2 sticks and a string become a quarter glass that children flip. Every flip they shout 1 rule in chorus. First, boil hard, then no dipping cups, then ladles boiled, then cups not shared. Traders roll their eyes until the stew tastes clean. Then they buy the toy for their children, because boredom should travel along with trade. The jail door declares the most radical thing a jail can announce. Time posted is honored even when the market is noisy. 2 wives arrive to bring stew and copies to 2 men who forgot to boil. The keeper points to chalk instead of stories. Love believes him faster than it used to because chalk is louder than oaths. You do not light a candle for this. You add a nail to time posted at knuckle height, so hands keep reading even when eyes choose drama. The infirmary keeps its patient pot-rolled exactly as the market does, and teaches you how to end a day. Boil hard at dusk, ladles boiled, linen boiled, hands washed, cups not shared, thanks counted, names learned. The prior reads the list out loud as if it were a psalm, and he were late for understanding. He is happy being smaller. He pours vinegar with the seriousness usually reserved for relics. You end part 2, where epidemics end in towns that chose lid over lyric, by turning off the horn lamp and leaving wood nails exactly where fingers cannot miss them. On the well, bucket covered, rope clean, water drawn above lip, mow dipping cups, time drawn, chalked, cover replaced. On the trench, downhill, lid closed, ash added daily. On the rail, boil hard, simmer kept, no topping yesterday, ladles boiled, cups not shared, hands washed. On the butcher, scald rolling, offal carted, drain clear, fly covers down, no swill to stew. On the bath slate, hands washed before cups fetched, thanks ladle. On the sheriff's board, thanks read before charges. On the beadle's plank, slander fined, no bricks. Everywhere that matters, soup before stories. Tap subscribe and drop your rule so I can keep showing up with this stupidly reliable miracle public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths try to season fever. Say, continue, and we'll walk the butcher's dawn, the fishwife's table, the pig yard, the inn yard, the road into harvest heat, and the quarter where one rope and one lid decide whether the long fever finds a song or a wall. Dawn turns the butcher's lane into a clock made of knives, so you set the horn lamp on his chopping block until a warm coin of light lands where fat, water, and habit bargain without witnesses. The gate creaks, the scald pot wakes, hooks knock together like impatient coins. You hang counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before mouths get lyrical. Scald rolling, knives boiled, boards rinsed with boiled water, offal carted, drain clear, fly covers down, no swill to stew, trench downhill with lid, thanks ladle for poor pot. He reads the board like a man who finally learned the price of skipping the boring line, then tips the first pail of boiled water across his knives until steam writes the only poetry you allow near meat. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that funds this lamp, not the bell that sells authentic recipes. And in the comments, post your 7-word Dawn rule you'd actually nail to a stall. Knives boiled, boards rinsed, fly covers down, drain clear. I'll pin the best and carry them to the next lane where blood still thinks it outruns lids. Fish arrives from the river the way rumors do, winking fast, a little proud of how quickly it traveled. Typhoid loves pride. You put the horn on the fishwife's plank and nail a slate where wrists scrape it. Gut on board, never in street. Scales scraped to bucket. Brine kept apart. Knives boiled each quarter glass. Hands washed. Fly net down. No rinsing in well. Cups not shared. A woman who can scale a carp blindfolded spits at no rinsing in well until your finger taps the well card water, drawn above lip, and she feels her own throat flinch. She rinses in brine instead, then pours the brine into the trench with a lid so orderly it could be a psalm. The pig yard learns it is either a blessing or a municipal sin. You tack a plank to the gate. Scald kept rolling. Runoff to trench lid shut. No cooling pork in the horse trough. No slops to stew cellar. Ash added after each drain. 2 boys try to sneak a bucket of good soup from pig water to the back of a stew vat and strike your card with their knuckles. The beadle's daughter sighs, hands them a mop, and writes, "Thanks for the ladle they carry to the infirmary instead." The poor pot eats what would have endangered the square, and nobody has to repent at high volume. In the shade behind the inn, barley porridge wants to become yesterday's friend. You treat it as an enemy until it proves otherwise. No topping yesterday lands on the inn's kitchen door with 2 nails. Boil hard at sunup. At mid, at vespers follows. Ladles boiled each quarter glass joins them. The keeper posts stew cup, not beer cup, beside his beam, and you watch him discover the cheap religion of separate vessels. He keeps cups not shared because his last rhymers paid their fine with a mop, and he enjoyed it. He adds soup before stories without asking. You nod like a bishop who approves of doctrine he did not have to write. The road into harvest heat tries to be a stew in its own right. Travelers, carts, dust, wells that want to be generous at the wrong temperature. You set the horn on a roadside post and copy the market into bearer grammar. Bucket covered, rope clean, water above lip, no dipping cups, lid replaced. You hang a second card at ankle level, where ankles remember better than eyes. Pigs kept away, slops to trench with lid. A carter stops, reads, then refills his barrel upstream. He leaves a sprig of rosemary and a coin in the thanks jar that sits under your sign in an old butter pot. You discover you love highway philanthropy more than pilgrim songs. Children keep the quarter glass without needing to be bribed now. They flip the sand and call the list. Boil hard. Ladles boiled. Hands washed. Lids down. They shout it like a play, but with the joy of command. Merchants, nobles, menders, and thieves all wait out the 5 minutes of rolling guilt. Flies give up. Steam behaves like policy. 10 minutes later, the song restarts, and you don't have to say a word because the square has body memory. A fever tries to slip in by way of a sheep butcher who washed the blade quick and the calluses slow. The surgeon meets him with the bowl already hot. The herb wife brings vinegar. The bath sisters hold the bench like deacons of soap. No anonymous posting guards the infirmary rail because fear prefers darkness. Cups not shared sits like a second rib cage around throats. The sheepman lives. He scrubs his board like penance. He hangs hands washed over his own nose. The town refuses to make a shrine. It makes a schedule. Mapping becomes the market's new sorcery. The sheriff pins a large board near the porch and calls it Miracles Prevented. It lists hours boiled, ladles boiled, lids closed, ropes scrubbed, trenches lidded, drains cleared, knives boiled, thanks ladled. People clap when lists grow and shrug when songs shrink. The poets add a verse about how boring miracles are now. You pay them anyway because you're a sentimental fool about the civic education of melody. One stall refuses to reform. You pick at its tariff until it has nothing left to hide behind. Rate posted arrives where haggling love to live. Boil schedule lands where I just did used to. Thanks jar visible steals the last refuge, embarrassment. The seller relents when his daughter touches no topping yesterday twice and says, "Father." He tries your doctrine for an afternoon and discovers the bowl sold faster than Tails did. He keeps it. You pretend you planned it that way. You thought you were done with butchers. Butchers will never be done with you. A swine fever elsewhere causes panic in your pigs, and panic tries to become theft. Offal carted and no swill to stew save your market again. The beetle sees the opportunity and sells 2 screens with flies stitched large as saints. The fishwives buy them, and a lemon smell you did not expect strengthens as if commerce had woken up prudent. Stew learns to fear the well more than gossip. 2 new wells open upstream of the trench after the inspector presents his rope to the reeve like a petition. He writes water drawn above lip on both with satisfaction. Children argue over who gets to chalk time drawn each hour. The old well becomes an emergency trough with a lid. You start thinking this town will be boring enough to outlive this summer, which is your favorite compliment. Strangers will save you and ruin you both. A caravan with far spices sets up a pot that smells like paradise and hides like hell. Yesterday's broth, today's meat, half a lid. You bring the horn, the sheriff brings chalk, the beadle brings a mop, the bath sisters bring vinegar, the surgeons bring the bowl. Boil hard, no topping yesterday, lad. Ladles boiled, cups not shared. Your grammar turns spectacle into shop. The seller, to his credit, copies your slate and triple boils. Then he buys screens. Portable decency remains the plot of this channel. Nothing cleans a town like unsexy minutes. The trenchmaker carves ash added into his lids. The rope van scrubs hemp until the windlass squeaks like an earnest hymn. The sisters of steam count hand-wash ladles at end of day. The beadle balances fines, mops, and thanks without requiring you to watch. The butcher offers the poor pot half a pig's heart with his own ladle. Somewhere a shrine saint nods at the way humility sounds when it doesn't try to rhyme. Because typhoid hunts the soft hours, you add a night slate you can live with. Dusk boil, 5 minutes, lids down, rope rinsed and hung, cover replaced, tranche lidded, drain cleared, thanks counted. The sheriff posts a patrol of lids. The poet writes a lullaby with an obscene rhyme about flies. Children repeat the clean part and giggle at the naughty part out of earshot. You find yourself less terrified of sleep. There will always be a voice that misses chaos. An old man looks at your lists and says, "In my day, stew tasted richer." You hand him a ladle, a screen, a lid. 5 minutes into the quarter glass, he is humming the children's beat and hollering at a boy to keep his hands below the fly net. "Richer, was it?" you say. He laughs, red-faced, and pays for vinegar. Conversion by chores, the only proof you respect. The jail door writes its own good news in chalk without being asked. Children named visitors. Wives welcome at posted hour. No ordeal talk. This has nothing obvious to do with stew and everything to do with a place learning to prefer schedules to thunder. Love that knows when to arrive carries the city through summers faster than bells. You did not expect to love the Beatles' ledger, but he begins each day reading thanks first because it keeps his arm kinder with fines and mops. He fines 2 boys for sharing a cup at the well, makes them boil the ladle, then assigns them to count quarter glasses. They get better at minutes. They like being part of the wall instead of the song. The horn lamp shows you where to leave hardware when you can't stay. On the well, bucket covered, rope clean, water above lip, no dipping cups, time drawn, cover replaced. On the trench, downhill, lid close, ash added Bailey. On stalls, boil schedule, ladles boiled, hands washed, no topping yesterday, rate posted, thanks visible. On the butcher, scald rolling, knives boiled, offal carted, drain clear, fly net down, no swill to stew. On the bath slate, hands washed before cups fetched, thanks ladle. On the sheriff's board, thanks read before charges, soup before stories. On the Beatles plank, slander fined, no bricks. The market reads itself. That's the dream. Subscribe and tap the bell so Part 4 reaches you before harvest heat teaches somebody to fancy yesterday's stew. In the comments, leave your 7-word fish or butcher rule you'll actually hammer at dawn knives. Boards rinsed, fly covers down, drain clear. And write continue if you want to walk the pig yard when generosity lies. The inn yard when hunger calls itself thrift. The road when travelers borrow cups. And the hospital when prudence has to sing lullabies. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the same miracle that beat pillories, forges, lanes, and marriages. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths season fever. The pig yard tries to pass generosity off as hygiene, so you set the horn lamp on the gate until a warm coin of light lands where slop and kindness usually conspire. The swineherd has a soft heart, soft enough to tilt a bucket of pot liquor toward a stew cellar, so nothing is wasted. Waste is not the enemy here. The enemy is memory that does not boil. You hang counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before mouths can baptize thrift as mercy. No swill to stew, run off to trench lid shut. Scald kept rolling, ash after each drain. Offal carted, pigs fenced from well path, thanks ladle to infirmary only. He reads the board like a penitent comparing stories to schedules and nods. A boy reaches under the rail with a pan. No swill to stew taps his knuckles. The Beatles' daughter hands him a ladle and points toward the infirmary gate. The poor pot eats what would have risked the square, and somebody's tomorrow keeps its breath because a rule refused to be sentimental. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that pays for horn oil and chalk, not the one that sells grandmother's secrets. And in the comments, write the 7-word pig yard rule you'd actually nail to a gate. No swill to stew, trench lidded, ash added. I'll pin the clearest and carry them to the next fence, where charity keeps confusing itself with convenience. The inn-yard tries to rename hunger as thrift. A cook with sleepy courage has been refreshing yesterday's barley with a ladle of today and a confession over the steam. You set the horn on his bench until the light embarrasses his honest fatigue, and hang the 3 sentences that save both bellies and pride. No topping yesterday, boil hard at sun-up, mid, and dusk, stew cup, not beer cup. He argues for a quarter glass, just until the cart arrives, and the sisters of steam answer with ladles and a slate, hands washed before cups fetched, ladles boiled each quarter glass, thanks ladle for poor pot. His day improves the way obedience sometimes does, suddenly and then completely. He posts soup before stories without being asked, because he finally smells what rhyme costs in summers like this. Travel is a stew promising to share everyone's germs equally unless wood and rope interfere. The road south keeps borrowing cups from the well. You hang a small card on the milepost where ankles must brush it before mouths try to be generous. No dipping cups, bucket covered, rope clean, water drawn above lip, cover replaced. A pilgrim reaches automatically. The board kisses his hand. He laughs like a man relieved to be contradicted softly. The sheriff adds time-drawn chalked to the post and pays a child to be the well's bell. Every hour, a finger writes the minute. A lid rises and returns, and someone in a different village lives because chalk taught lids to be impatient. The fishwives accept that brine is a sacrament nobody sings about. They nail the fly net down over the cool table and write gut on board, not in street on a plank scoured white enough to count as theology. A woman with a knife quick enough to shave gods cuts a carp, scrapes scales into a bucket, and pours the bucket toward the trench with a lid that closes like an amen. She grins at the horn coin reflected in the brine and says, "The only liturgy you trust in July, boil it again." The beadle notices she has become a better sermon than any he has cuffed. The butcher, edified by boredom, keeps his scald rolling and his drain humming. He discovers that boards rinsed with boiled water makes customers point less and buy more. He also learns to love a sentence he once despised, "Thanks ladle for poor pot." He puts his own hand in the ladle every third quarter glass, not because anyone would know otherwise, but because he sleeps better when vinegar buys bowls. The market begins to dress itself in received gratitude, not injured pride. Typhoid looks for the moment when stew becomes a conversation piece. The quarter glass interrupts that loudly and often. Children flip sand, shout, "Boil hard," and everyone plays along with a seriousness that keeps flies ignorant. The poets write a verse for the short boil and are made to paint the schedule beneath it. Their tune becomes an instrument for remembering, not forgetting. You realize you have achieved the rarest civic feat, a habit that doesn't require your voice to continue working. The infirmary learns lullabies that refuse to flatter fever. Boil hard at dusk. Ladles boiled before compline. Linen boiled. Hands washed. Cups not shared. Honey allowed. Names learned. Thanks counted. The prior reads the sequence out loud, smaller than he used to be and happier for it. A monk who once loved disputations now loves lids. The surgeon writes one more entry in Prevented Hymns, a page that keeps outgrowing the folder that once held stories no one needed. The Sisters of Steam carry rosemary and make the ward smell like a conspiracy of soap. There is always one cousin who misses plague. He announces a contest for the richest stew, which is to say the one most likely to hide yesterday under spiced courage. The sheriff lets him post a price and then nails "no topping yesterday" above his head in larger letters. The beadle holds the mop at parade rest like a halberd. The contest scrubs itself into competence. Lids click, the ladles go into rolling water. Stew proves richness the only way the square now accepts, on the quarter glass, under horn, into a bowl that feeds the poor when the hour ends. The cousin has a revelation that makes him blink like a man who asked for thunder and found bread. He writes thanks and does not apologize. Because water is a traveling rumor, you station a second inspector at the northern well and draft a rope roster. Rope scrubbed at sunup and vespers. Cover replaced after each draw. Time drawn chalked. No dipping cups. A carter from the marsh pulls at the bucket with his own mug dangling from a strap. The board taps him. The child holding the chalk laughs. The carter hangs his mug on his own wagon and learns to admire lids. The justice you prefer is always the kind that saves people without humiliating them. The Abbey kitchen, which taught men to love barley, now teaches men to love hygiene. No water under oil finds a new home beneath the sizzling pan, where novices fry eggs. Apron tied lands over the hearth. Cover sparks turns into a reflex. The cellarer signs thanks for lids donated to the pitch yard and asks for 2 more screens from the fly rights. The monks decide to be proud of clean rather than dour about nothing. In the inn yard, a singer tests nostalgia as if it were a recipe. He croons that yesterday's stew was sweeter. You hand him a ladle and a clock. He becomes a quarter-glass man by the end of the hour, boiling, rinsing, counting, and sweating himself toward a melody that walks instead of sways. He discovers the tune improves when the stew stops trying to be a character. He sells 4 copies of the boil schedule painted fancy and stops calling it vulgar. The pig yard, flatteringly reformed, produces its own piety. No cooling pork in horse trough becomes scald, kept rolling becomes runoff to trench, lid shut becomes ash after each drain, and nobody needs to say please because the yard finally prefers itself alive. Boys still try to cheat with buckets when adults look away. Your cards tap their wrists until they grow up. One boy becomes the trench keeper for the fun of saying done. You walk the rope, trench, stall, bath, and bench the way a priest walks a nave after vespers. The horn lamp makes the cards look ordinary, which is their superpower. You thump the rail once, wood hums, the quarter glass flips, the stew rolls, the ladles dive, the hands wash, the lids close. What 20 lines of Latin and a heroic song could not accomplish, 1 quarter glass and 3 nailed sentences did. Because summer will keep hunting you after you end this episode, you leave the market with the only gift that survives theft: hardware. On wells, bucket covered, rope clean, water above lip, no dipping cups, time drawn, cover replaced. On trenches, downhill, lid, ash. On stalls, boil hard, simmer kept, no topping yesterday, ladles boiled, hands washed, cups not shared, rate posted, thanks visible. On pigs, scald rolling, run off to trench lid shut, no swill to stew. On fish, gut on board, brine kept, knives boiled, fly net bound. On butcher, boards rinsed with boiled water, offal carted, drain clear. On infirmary, boil at dusk, ladles boiled, linen boiled, cups not shared, honey allowed, names learned, thanks counted. On sheriff's board, thanks read before charges, soup before stories. On beetle, slander fined, no bricks. Tap subscribe and drop your 7-word rule so I can keep pushing this kit down the road to the next square that deserves boredom more than fever. Type continue if you want to walk the inn at harvest, the field cookpots when reapers forget lids, the town's first autumn rain when trenches turn rude again, and the way a county teaches itself to taste prevention without calling it a miracle. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the one miracle that has rescued 5 different medieval messes already. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths season water into disease. Harvest opens like an oven door in a field, so you set the horn lamp on the trestle behind the reaper's wagons until a warm coin of light lands where barley, water, and bravado would rather shake hands than wash them. The field cookpots make their own town. One black belly for porridge, one copper belly for stew, one kettle for water that thinks steam alone is virtue. The quarter-glass children have arrived with their sand and their joy. The sisters of steam have arrived with towels and vinegar. The beetle has arrived with a mop and a book that smells less like theater and more like plumbing. You hang counsel at mouth height on the wagon's tailboard where wrists must bruise before mouths pronounce thrift a religion. Water drawn above lip. Boil hard at sunup. Boil hard each quarter glass. No topping yesterday. Ladles boiled. Cups not shared. Hands washed before ladle. Rope clean. Bucket covered. Thanks ladle for pour pot. The foreman touches every line with 2 fingers as if testing a fence. The cook ties her hair like a vow and smiles because the rules smell like barley. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp paid and this quarter glass flipped, not the bell that sells a story about old country stew. Then drop in the comments your 7-word harvest rule you would nail beside any cookpot. Boil hard, no topping yesterday, cups not shared. I'll pin the clearest and carry it to the next field where lids still think they are decorations. The inn-yard behind the Reaper's Tavern tries to be helpful. Helpfulness nearly marries hindsight. A barrel of last night's ale for rinsing knives sits under the shade like temptation with a thirst. The hostler offers clean water from a bucket that remembers 3 kinds of hands. You hammer 2 cards where work lives. No rinsing in beer or ale, no dipping cups at well. The innkeeper lifts his palms, offended into improvement. He brings 2 new kettles to the yard and paints them with flies crossed out. Stew cup, not beer cup, lands on the beam inside because vessels are religions. The sisters of steam hang a washing cloth across a rope, ladle vinegar like a psalm, and watch the yard learn liturgy without an organ. Reapers' knives kiss sheaves and mouths. You do not let romance tutor them. Knives boiled each quarter. Glass hangs at elbow height next to the cook's board, and the quarter-glass children become field clerks. Sand flipped, 5 minutes rolling, knives in, knives out, towels on. A man who thought his hands were no one's business learns to love being told what to do by a child with a clock when he hears the word typhoid spoken softly like a debt he doesn't wish to owe. He drops a coin in thanks and mutters that he is grateful for being bullied by sand. Autumn rain comes like an alibi for mud, so you put the horn by the trench and let the coin of light accuse every puddle within 10 paces of a spigot. Trench downhill, lid closed. Ash added after each drain goes on a post, so ankles will read it when eyes are tired. The trench maker strings 2 lids with leather straps. Boys learn to drop them with a smack that sounds like amen. The rope man scratches rope rinsed and hung into the windlass, bored by summer's insistence. The well inspector chalks time drawn through drizzle until the habit outweighs weather. Flies drown in lids rather than in bowls. You believe in no miracle more than this: rain coached into humility by instructions legible to tired hands. Pigs rehearse their most ancient treachery, kindness, with a smell. The swineherd, who has learned to enjoy surviving sentimentality, nails no swill to stew on the gate and runoff to trench lid shut where the splash loves to land. He finds himself proud of being predictable. A reaper tries to slip a bucket from the pig lane to the soup. The beetle smiles like a teacher with a toy and places the quarter glass in his hands. "Count," she says. He does. The impulse reconsidered itself in 5 minutes. The stew returned to being food. The fish cart arrives late with a brag of mushrooms and a worry of flies. The fishwife ties down her net, lifts the cross-stamped mug she bought last week, and reads her own plank aloud like a sister rebuking a flirtation. Gut on board, brine kept, knives boiled, no rinsing in well. She salts, she boils, she pours brine into the lidded trench, and she signs thanks on the infirmary slate because habits that save the public sometimes borrow from private pride without guilt. She becomes a rumor in the best way, a woman whose plank sells as much health as fish. On the road between market and field, the worst cup is the cup you didn't mean to use. No dipping cups at the roadside well is a member of the tribe of sentences that feel insulting first and comforting for the rest of your life. A teamster reaches, gets tapped, laughs, and lets the quarter-glass child pour boiled water into his mug. He leaves a lid behind for the next fool. That is called civilizing without speeches. Typhoid hunts the spaces where stories outrun bowls. The beetle keeps silence quarter glass even when musicians practice and girls flirt. 5 minutes of rolling boil buys an afternoon. 5 more minutes buys the evening. People carry their boredom like candles. When romance tries to name the hour ruined, the stew answers with a smell worth waiting for. The beetle has invented the only entertainment a fever can't enjoy. The poor pot in the infirmary yard becomes a city's conscience. Sellers drop a ladle each hour into thanks. The Sisters of Steam wheel lids like heralds. The surgeon appears on schedule with the bowl for washing cups that do not leave the ward. Cups Not Shared prompts a poet to write the dullest verse your series has hosted and the best one for July. One bowl each, one breath each, water for both. The prior hangs the words where novices fetch towels, and the novices learn to smile at prevention. You will not tire of catching charity when it tries to cosplay as virtue. The innkeeper walks out with a basin of yesterday's barley and asks whether the poor pot might benefit from richness. No topping yesterday answers the way it always does, with a nail that can be seen from any foolish angle. He brings the barley inside, boils, discards, then adds to thanks the way towns add wisdom, overnight, without trumpets. Because summer is never content to injure only once, the sheriff asks to post your market schedule in every harvest hamlet his circuit serves. You give him the large plank, boil hard at sunup, 10 minutes, simmer kept, boil every quarter glass, 5 minutes, ladles boiled, hands washed, cups not shared. He climbs onto his cart with the board, 2 lids, 2 screens, a rope, a wreath, and the sentence that makes clerks look like allies rather than ornaments. Thanks read before charges. You pretend not to notice how much you love watching bureaucracy behave. The beadle gets his favorite convert this season, an old woman with a medieval memory that insists her mother's stew never killed a soul. He hands her a ladle, points to the quarter glass, and turns her into a steward of 5-minute rolling. She falls in love with the sound of boil. She buys a screen. She tells a child that her mother did not have to prove anything. Her mother lived because her mother's mother threw things away at dusk. The story has a future now. Autumn threatens to hide danger in first rain, so you perform the only hoodoo you trust. You nail sentences where wrists live. On every lid, close after each dip. On every trench, ash after each drain. On every rope, rinsed and hung. On every cup rack, boiled before hanging. On the scald pot, kept rolling. On the pour pot, discard at vespers. A poet asks whether towns are allowed to be this boring. You tell him that boring is the sound of people living long enough to pay you back. You keep counting miracles prevented because counting is the only praise that doesn't backfire. Hours boiled grows like wheat. Ladles boiled grows like song. Cups washed grows like patience. Rope scrubs and lid closes outpace charges until charges becomes an annex to thanks. The sheriff posts the totals at his bench the way he posts fines, and people applaud like lids. It is the strangest kind of civic festival you have ever hosted, one that smells like honesty. Finally, the stew seller you feared most, first prize in every nostalgia contest, flips your cards and survives. He cannot ride habit like a horse anymore. He must write it like a receipt. He learns to enjoy it because his child stopped being sick. He adds ladle boiled by child in chalk and forces himself to keep it because the sound of a child counting is now his mother tongue. He ladles a measure into the poor pot with his own hand at vespers. He isn't virtuous, he is careful. That is all you needed. Before you leave this harvest field, you do what made 5 other medieval crises stand down. You leave hardware instead of speeches. On the cookpot tailboard, water drawn above lip, boil hard, simmer kept, no topping yesterday, ladles boiled, cups not shared, hands washed, thanks ladle. On the rope post, rope cream, bucket covered, time drawn chalked, cover replaced. On the trench lids, downhill, closed, ash after each drain. On the butcher block, knives boiled, boards rinsed with boiled water, offal carded, drain clear, fly net down. On the fish plank, gut on board, brine kept, knives boiled, no rinsing in well. On the in-beam, stew cup, not beer cup, soup before stories. On the sheriff's cart, thanks read before charges. On the beadle's plank, slander fined, no bricks. On the infirmary gate, pour potboil to him, discard at vespers. Tap subscribe and leave your rule so I can keep dragging this kit toward the next parish that deserves lids more than lyric. Say continue if you want to walk the inn at harvest dusk when thrift forgets it is dangerous. The road wells when travelers invent kindness with dirty buckets, the jail when chalk keeps love on time, and the autumn market where rain teaches fly nets to outsing nostalgia. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the only miracle this channel brags about, public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths season water into grief. The inn at harvest dusk tries to make thrift look holy, so you set the horn lamp on the yard beam until a warm coin of light lands where yesterday's porridge, today's hurry, and everyone's thirst try to shake hands. Barrels lean like tired lungs. 2 copper kettles breathe without opinions. On the trestle, the cook has stacked 3 ladles, the clean, the about to be, and the lie, and a basin labeled rents that remembers 5 songs and 0 boils. You hang counsel at mouth height, where wrists have to bruise before mouths bless thrift as wisdom. No topping yesterday, boil hard at dusk, 5 minutes rolling. Ladles boiled each quarter glass, stew cup not beer cup. Hands washed before ladle, cups not shared. Rope rinsed and hung, bucket covered, thanks ladle to pour pot. The hostler reads every line as if each were a door latch. The sisters of steam stretch a washing cloth across a rope, ladle vinegar like a psalm, and smile the smile of people who know how to keep a century from breaking its own promise. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp fueled and the quarter glass honest. Not the bell that sells mother's secret. Then drop your 7-word in-yard rule you would really nail on a beam. No topping yesterday. Ladles boiled. Stew cup separate. I'll pin the clearest and carry it to the next yard where thrift still tries to baptize appetite. Entertainment rehearses its oldest shortcut. The player who swears a spoon dipped hot through a song is as good as boil. You answer with time and wood. The quarter glass flips. Steam rolls for 5 minutes. Ladles dive into honest water. The player keeps time with his own breath and finds the tune improves when Stu stops pretending to be a character. He sells 3 painted boil schedules at the end of the set. You pay him to paint 2 more on the inn wall. Art becomes signage. Signage becomes mercy. Mercy becomes habit. The road out to the cider press is lined with temptations you cannot sermon away. shady wells, buckets without lids, the swagger of generosity. You set the horn on a post where ankles must brush it before mouths discover their mistakes. Bucket covered, rope clean, water drawn above lip, no dipping cups, cover replaced. A woman reaches with her husband's cup and feels the card kiss her knuckles. She laughs, lets a child pour boiled water from the inn kettle, and leaves a sprig of rosemary in the thanks jar under your sign. This is the town you wanted. Prevention that does not require humiliation. Rain remembers every trench you forgot in spring. You follow the first autumn cloud with lids and ash, the way a priest follows bells with bread. Trench downhill, lid closed. Ash after each drain lands at ankle height on 4 new rails. The trench maker ties leather straps to 2 heavy lids so boys can drop them one-handed with a sound you have grown to love. Flies drown in the right places. Mud learns to settle where stew cannot see it. A poet writes a 2-line verse called Lids That Sound Like Amen. You pretend not to be pleased. Fish tries to smuggle memory under a praise of mushrooms. The fishwives nail their fly nets down over the cool plank and rehearse your plank aloud. Gut on board, brine kept apart, knives boiled each quarter glass, no rinsing in well. They decant the brine into a trench with a lid and smugly count 3 gulls that fail to dine. A lad from the marsh, apprenticed to nobody except boldness, watches and asks for a screen he can carry home. You sell him 2 and tell him to charge half and collect thanks in names. He blushes in a way that saves people. The jail door keeps love punctual without applause. Time posted is chalked twice eye height for worry, knuckle height for habit. Access for spouse sits like a good hinge. Charge copied meets people at the hatch. No ordeal talk kills the urge to sell extra nights as prudence. 2 children arrive with stew and say their names into the chalk without being coached. The keeper reads the names like bands. Love that learned to be a schedule is now your favorite theology. The sheriff's cart becomes the traveling blackboard of boredom you always hoped law would become. He nails thanks read before charges to his rail at the first hamlet, and watches a crowd prefer lids to thunder. He reads hours boiled and lids closed and rope scrubbed before he reads who paid pennies for dipping cups. The market claps once like lids. He eats stew that rolled on the quarter glass. His clerk paints the boil schedule next to a no doubling merchant line and spends the afternoon looking useful without becoming dramatic. A brewer tries to sell you absolution in the shape of ale. Hot beer kills, he says, no more water. You set the horn coin on his cask until his grin remembers to sit down. Stew cup, not beer cup, answers on the in-beam. Cups not shared joins it. Hands washed keeps the bench interesting. The Sisters of Steam bring a hand wash ladle and set it between the cask and the stew. The brewer discovers he loves selling to clean hands more than he loved pretending chemistry had a shortcut. He puts a lid on a boast. He writes thanks into the infirmary slate because he is not a villain, only a man who needed a schedule.
Pig generosity returns with company. 3 swill buckets try to slip into 3 stews at 3 corners. No swill to stew taps 3 wrists in 1 hour. The beetle posts a mop at each corner, like a friendly halberd. Boys race the quarter glass with clean water. The poor pot swallows what appetite would have sold as thrift. This is the circuit you built with nails. Impulse wants applause. You give it errands. You learn to love the sentence that never gets applause. Ladles boiled each quarter glass. It is not dramatic. It is simply the sound of wood crossing heat with a polite refusal to die. Every time a handle knocks the pot rim, you imagine destroying a bridge between 2 strangers' mouths. Counting mutes a dozen folk songs. You bankroll silence and call it culture. At harvest's peak, the stew contest returns under a better name, boil-off. No judges, no poets, only quarter blasts, lists, and thanks jars. Lids drop, steam rolls, ladles dive, hands wash, mugs refuse to share. The beetle taps. The sisters of steam laugh into their towels. The butcher contributes his own pot to the poor pot, like a man admitting he has finally learned to adore boredom. Nobody hires a rhyme to prove a point. They flip sand. They eat. Roadside inns copy your schedules with the enthusiasm of thieves and the decency of hosts. Boil hard at sunup is painted over 3 doors. No topping yesterday lives where your memory begged to. Hands washed travels faster than coins. A merchant stops pretending he likes vintage stew. A priest sets honey aloud in the infirmary without you having to watch. The world is browsing your shelf. Rain forces you to invent new chores. You write a night slate for yards where stories sleep. Dusk boil, 5 minutes. Ladles boiled. Cups boiled. Rope rinsed and hung. Cover replaced. Drain cleared. Trench lid secured. Thanks counted. The sheriff reads the slate aloud at 3 corners and then watches a boy close a trench with the seriousness of an elder. Nothing in your short life with this town sounds better than lids declared with dignity. You knew there would be a relapse. An old cook, tired and adorable, whispers that her mother would be insulted by these boards. You hand her the quarter glass and the ladle and a stool. 5 minutes later she is humming with the children and scolding a cousin about cups. She writes thanks into the slate under her own pot and asks for a screen from the fly-rights. Her mother would not be insulted. Her mother boiled. A patch of long fever appears in the marsh and dies on your edge because lids lived and cups did not kiss. The hospital ledger writes prevented hymns with 3 more lines. The prior learns to say the word boring as if it were a sacrament. The herb wife hangs honey aloud a little higher and leaves extra vinegar for the hand wash bench. Prevention has the manners you wanted virtue to learn. You let the poets have 1 August stanza as payment for the patience they have shown. They sing the quarter glass in a round, 4 voices of 5 minutes each, steam and wood and rope and ash. Children practice in doorways. Innkeepers practice in yards. The fishwives practice by the brine. The butcher sings at his scald. The jailkeeper taps chalk to stay in time. Town sounds like counting. Counting sounds like kindness.
Before you shoulder this kit to the next parish, you leave exactly what worked, because not even you are interesting enough to improve on it. On the tailboard, water above lip, boil hard, simmer kept, no topping yesterday, ladles boiled, cups not shared, hands washed, thanks ladle. On the rope post, rope clean, bucket covered, time drawn, cover replaced. On the trench lid, downhill, closed, ash after each drain. On the in-beam, stew cup not beer cup, soup before stories. On the fish plank, gut on board, brine kept, knives boiled, no rinsing in well. On the butcher block, scald rolling, boards rinsed with boiled water, offal carted, drain clear, fly net down. On the sheriff's board, thanks read before charges. On the beadle's plank, slander fined, no bricks. On the infirmary gate, pour potboil to him, discard at vespers, cups not shared. Tap subscribe and leave your 7-word harvest rule you will actually nail on a beam. No topping yesterday, ladles boiled, stew cups separate, and type continue if you want the last turn. The autumn market when first rain tries to baptize bad habits, the winter cellar where barrels rename thrift, the final accounting where thanks outgrows charges, and the way a county learns to treat prevention like bread rather than like theater. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the same unglamorous miracle that made 6 other medieval messes quiet. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths make water dangerous again. First rain comes in sideways and honest, so you set the horn lamp on the market rail until a warm coin of light lands where lids and habits must choose which one to obey. The smell that had been summer onion, pepper, dignity changes to earth and slick wood. Trench lids say amen when boys drop them with straps you insisted on. Rope creaks as if the windlass remembered every hand that forgot it. The quarter-glass children shake sand loose the way saints shake off flattery. You hang the last slate of the season where wrists brush it before mouths excuse themselves. Rain rule boil hard at each quarter glass. Trench lid shut after each drain. Ash added. Boards rinsed with boiled water. Rope rinsed and hung. Cover replaced. No topping yesterday, no matter the weather. Cups not shared even under awnings. The beetle's daughter taps the rail with the beetle, and the market hums its only hymn that works in wet, counting. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that pays for lids, rope, vinegar, and this lamp. Then drop in the comments the 7 words you will actually nail when the first storm knocks. Boil hard, lid shut, ash added, cups not shared. I'll pin the clearest and carry them to the next square that deserves boredom more than fever. The first mercy of rain is that it reminds wood it is mortal. The second is that it exposes liars. A stew seller pulls back a lid and calls the steam sufficient. The quarter glass flips. 5 minutes roll. The lid learns the difference between costume and work. A fishwife, proud as salt, ties her fly net lower because flies ride drizzle like a privilege. The butcher rinses his boards with boiling water and coughs out an apology to no one in particular. The trench maker plants his shovel like a banner and adds ash until the slick sheen becomes a matte sentence. The sisters of steam lift a washing cloth across a rope and say, "Hands,"
and hands obey because dignity grew fingers this summer. The inn-yard tries to baptize thrift in barrels. No topping yesterday is already nailed where a drunk can read it, yet the cook considers singing an exception. You move the horn coin along the lip until please remembers it isn't a temperature. Boil hard at dusk rescues a story from the time it wants to borrow. The brewer points at foam and says, purity. Stew cup, not beer cup, keeps vessels faithful. A pilgrim raises a shared mug under the eave. Cups not shared answers like a gate. You do not need thunder when wood does the tapping. The road wells become the county's choir. Bucket covered, rope clean, water drawn above lip, no dipping cups, time drawn chalked, cover replaced, has traveled faster than processions. Children in hamlets you have never seen now shout the quarter glass into puddles with fines you didn't have to invent. A carter hammers a scrap lid onto a wagon bucket and ties it with twine. He will be the reason 3 strangers do not weep in a fortnight. This is your favorite math. 1 nail, 3 names you'll never hear. The sheriff arrives with his traveling blackboard and no appetite for speeches. He reads thanks. First hours boiled, lids closed, ladles boiled, ropes scrubbed, drains cleared, offal carted, brine poured to lidded trenches. And the square applauds like lids. He finds 2 men 1 groat each for dipping cups and has them boil ladles while the quarter glass rolls. He posts thanks read before charges again, not because people forgot, but because success is repetition tipping into relief. He buys lids for a hamlet that only had rope. He gives the rope man 2 wreaths for wells he made dull on purpose. A fever cluster arrives from the marsh and breaks on your edge because boredom is now policy. The surgeon warms the bowl. The herb wife ladles vinegar. The Sisters of Steam maintain a hand-wash bench like a checkpoint of courtesy. No anonymous posting guards the infirmary rail with the quiet swagger of a broom. The poor pot sings to rolling rhythm. Cups not shared is enforced by a monk who discovered he loves standing between vessels. The rhyme sellers try to sell lament. The beetle mops into their hands. Grief realizes it prefers doing the washing up. Fish insists on being tempting. You make brine louder than lyric. Gut on board. Brine kept. Knives boiled. No rinsing in well holds even when the river upsets its banks. The fly wrights arrive with screen patches like catechisms. A woman from upriver, impressed by boredom, buys 2 screens and the plank itself and rides off grinning like someone who has stolen a miracle that fits in a cart. The pig yard, formerly a parable of affection, stays redeemed without needing you to clap. No swill to stew is as natural now as salt. Runoff to trench lid shut gets executed by boys who raised lids this summer the way some boys raised banners. They shout, "Done," as if they invented civics. In a sense, they did. You climb the scaffold of autumn and do the most unmusical thing this channel ever asked you to do. You draft the winter cellar. Barrels rinsed with boiled water goes on the door. No topping yesterday goes on the mash tub. Ladles boiled lands beside the spigot. Stew cup, not beer cup, repeats because November can still be July in a careless mug. The cellarer adds a sentence neither of you predicted you'd admire, hands washed before tapping, and removes 3 verses he had been nursing about grandfather's cider. Sentiment survives, microbes do not. The beadle reads his ledger out loud to children because mops raised them into allies. Slander fined becomes a revenue stream modest enough to feel moral. Egg at a face buys ash for trenches. Brick at a face paid for 2 lids in a hamlet you might never see. He ends with thanks because he likes the way his voice sounds when people are pleased. Markets always want to exit with a flourish. You veto it with a checklist. Dusk boil 5 minutes. Ladles boiled. Cups boiled. Rope rinsed and hung. Cover replaced. Trench lids secured. Ash added. Pour pot, discard at vespers. Thanks counted. The foreman of the reapers ties the quarter glass to the post as if it were a church bell. It is. People learn to use sanctity when it keeps them alive. Winter's first frost strips excuses. Hands washed pains less when water steams. Boil hard heals more because the quarter glass gives boredom something to sit on. Cups not shared becomes easy once mugs are warm again. The sisters of steam keep towels folded like ordinances. The prior pins honey allowed where novices can touch it without bargaining. The shepherd adds no topping yesterday above a pot in a field. These are the sort of sentences that stay when your lamp goes elsewhere. Then you do what I promised at the start. You count miracles prevented until the column outweighs habit. Hours boiled this season, enough to hum in your sleep. Ladles boiled, enough to embarrass a summer that liked to boast. Cups washed, enough to turn gossip into dishwater. Rope scrubs, enough to cut an old infection's ladder to pieces. Lid closes, enough to make saints laugh. Thanks outgrew charges somewhere after the first storm. The sheriff posted the totals at his bench, and nobody asked for a song. Because endings should be instructions, you leave hardware that does not need your voice. On wells, bucket covered, rope clean, water above lip, no dipping cups, time drawn, cover replaced. On trenches, downhill, lid closed, ash added daily. On stalls, boil hard, simmer kept, no topping yesterday, ladles boiled, hands washed, cups not shared, rate posted, thanks visible. On fish planks, gut on board, brine kept, knives boiled, no rinsing in well, fly net down. On butcher blocks, scald rolling, boards rinsed with boiled water, offal carted, drain clear, fly net down. On in-beams, stew cup not beer cup, soup before stories. On the sheriff's rail, thanks read before charges. On beetle planks, slander fined, no bricks. On the infirmary gate, pour pot boil to him, discard at vespers, cups not shared, rate posted, thanks visible. On the rope of your own heart, repeat. This is the part where I ask for 2 small coins that keep this whole unsubtle miracle moving. Subscribe and tap the bell so the next 7-part build lands while your beam still remembers its height. Then leave 2 gifts in the comments for the parish you will never see and the child who will carry the next ladle. Your own 7-word well or vat rule you will actually nail at hand level. Boil hard, lid shut, ash added, cups not shared. And the next theme title you want hammered into drills under horn. Try one of these, or write the one your street needs. How parish bells outran gossip. Why city walls ate generals. What market stalls taught ministers. We will shoulder horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, fly nets, lids, the Sisters of Steam's towels, the Beatles' beetle, the sheriff's board, the surgeon's bowl, and the only brag this channel intends to die with, public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths turn summer stew into winter